I would like to talk, first of all, about the new initiative that has been taken by Janssen, the company I work for, Johnson & Johnson company, actually the pharma company of Johnson & Johnson, because I think it is relevant also in the context of what we are discussing today, namely the launching and founding the Global Public Health Group. Then I would briefly give you an overview of the status of our portfolio in global public health with respect to neglected tropical diseases in a broader context. And then I would like, and I think that's also extremely important, like to offer some suggestions or thoughts around how can we improve, increase the commitment of the pharmaceutical industry in this field. Because I do think that we have a unique role to play. First of all, I think more than half a century ago, Dr. Paul Janssen, the founder of Janssen Pharmaceutica, later acquired by Johnson & Johnson, is actually well known throughout the global scientific community and was a gifted and passionate scientist, and with a profound willingness to consider new scientific approaches. And it's along that legacy, actually, that we're building on that and have established now, since August last year, a global public health group. So why is that important, you might think or ask? First of all, I think it testifies that we do mean business. And secondly, I think it also points out that it is important to have a dedicated group looking at these specific challenges in the field of global public health. As we will hear more today, I think, there is no commercial incentives to do this. So we also need to do it differently, using a different model than our traditional for-profit R&D and commercialization of products. We have set up this group pretty much identical to the therapeutic areas, how the therapeutic area groups have been structured within our organization. So there is an R&D head, and I'm leading the group, the research and development part, and there is a commercial head for the typical TAs, therapeutic areas. In our case, it's a specialist and a whole team that actually look from the start of research and development at access issues, how to guarantee, how to make sure that at the end, when the drug is developed and made available through registration, how can access be given to the patient populations that we are talking about. Just a very short overview of the pipeline. We have a pretty impressive pipeline, I think, for a group that is new. Most of it comes out of the infectious disease therapeutic area. I was previously the head of development there. We have bedaquiline, as you well know, for MDR-TB. I will go into that a little bit more later, because a couple of the examples that we're actually facing, or issues that we're facing, are very relevant for the discussion today as well. We have rilpivirine, which is one of our HIV drugs. It has been approved and is currently on the market, but we are developing a long-acting formulation because we believe that basically around the world, people living with HIV, but more specifically in resource-limited settings, a long-acting formulation will mean a great advancement in treatment of HIV and prophylaxis of infection of HIV, because it takes out a number of supply chain issues, but also, more importantly, the compliance improvement is met, I think, through a long-acting formulation injection. Then I'll talk about mebendazole and flubendazole, very relevant for the discussion today. I think we've been a little bit over-enthusiastic here, because flubendazole is not actually in phase 1. We are preparing phase 1. And some of the delay is actually due to the fact that the formulation technology that we need to apply to get systemic exposure, to get bioavailability of the drug, is quite challenging, but we will get there. And then the last one I will very briefly touch upon is an example of that we're not only looking at compounds, at drugs, but looking at them on a more holistic way, in a more holistic way, at providing healthcare solutions. And we're also using e-technology, or M technology, sometimes it is called mobile technology, to assist access, to empower patients and to improve delivery of care and help to have a sustainable healthcare. I promised that I would use our TB drug as an example of some of the challenges that we face that you perhaps might not think of. Bedaquiline is the first new mechanism of action in TB in over 40 years. It has been approved conditionally based on phase 2 data, and I think that shows how important the innovation was considered by the healthcare authorities. But it also means that the database of efficacy and safety is limited. And we realize that, and therefore, in the accelerated or conditional approval process, there is also the commitment as a pharmaceutical company we have to underwrite to further develop the drug. We are doing that. We will soon start, and also there we will do that in a quite innovative partnership. There isn't much more that I can say about it now, but you will soon hear about that. We'll soon start a phase 3 study. But a phase 3 study in MDR-TB patients, we are aiming at well over 800 patients in that study, looking at different regimens and also trying to shorten treatment regimen. That study will take a long time before it is completed and before we have definitive results. We believe that it might take until 2020, 2022 even time frame before we will have results. We also realize that the drug has had quite a limited label, I think appropriate given the stage of development and the database that I was referring to earlier. And in the WHO interim policy guidelines, it's pretty much reserved to a niche of the multi-drug resistant TB patients, namely the pre-XDR and the XDR, so the more advanced resistance patients. Now, of course, those patients, the medical need is the highest, and therefore it seems appropriate, and I think, again, taking the development stage into account, I think it is appropriate, but there is also a risk. In those patients, the drug, of course, doesn't have much help from other active TB drugs, and there is always the chance that a resistance, of course, might also develop against our drug. That's why I think it is extremely important that sooner rather than later we can combine it with other novel mechanisms of actions to protect the drug and the new mechanism of actions, and also look at the potential to shorten treatment and to eliminate some of the toxic current standard of care drugs. So we have registration in the major burden countries. We have approval by the FDA and in Europe and in Russia. Others are pending. We're doing it in partnerships. Not only have we worked together with TB Alliance to develop the drug, but also to secure access. We are working in partnerships in the Russian and CIS countries through Farm Standard, a local pharmaceutical company, both for manufacturing and providing access in existing TB programs, very important for us. And also in India, through a technology transfer, we will have significant manufacturing capabilities to supply the high burden countries. What is extremely important, and there I think the example comes in, that the investment and commitment doesn't stop at registration. There is a lot more that is needed, especially in areas where the healthcare systems are not that strong. I talked about appropriate use. It's extremely important that we get the drug to patients in a way that the drug can maintain its activity and is not prone to resistance developing. It's also extremely important. I laid out the timelines for the pivotal phase 3, but we want, first of all, to broaden the label faster, because we believe that there are a lot of MDR-TB patients who should get access to bedaquiline. And also to provide more insight in the efficacy and safety of the drug, we have committed to a worldwide registry, and we will do an ongoing analysis to provide real-world use of the drug, combined with data that we're gathering on the current standard of care without bedaquiline as a comparator group. But just to show that the significant investments don't stop once the drug has become available or is developed. I talked about long-acting rilpivirine. We believe both in pre-exposure prophylaxis that we do together with our partner Path, and in the maintenance therapy combined with another long-acting, actually the only other long-acting antiretroviral in development, a compound by ViiV, owned by ViiV, for maintenance therapy, as I just explained. We do other things in prevention, in the field of prevention of HIV, more specifically in women, since there is such a disproportional infection rate in women and girls. We were the first to grant a royalty-free license to the International Partnership for Microbicides, one of our HIV drugs. We handed over to them, and they've now received a worldwide license. It's not limited to resource-limited settings, it's worldwide now. A license to develop the drug in vaginal ring as a pre-exposure prophylaxis, and I think a very important tool that empowers women in these at risk. There are 2 phase 3 studies ongoing, so we're expecting in 2015 results of this, and this could mean a major breakthrough in the prophylaxis and preventing transmission of HIV. I talked a little bit about the mHealth. It's not just a reminder, text message reminder for the patient to take the pills, it's part of that. But there are many of these systems, and we are aiming at a lot more. We provide health tips, disease information, treatment follow-up, side effect management actually. We have a whole algorithm that has been worked out by key opinion leaders in India, where we currently actually are doing a phase 3 study with the system, where patients can interact with the system and follow a decision tree on what their side effects they might experience, how they should be managed, and what they should do. And then, importantly also, it's the first time actually that all of this interaction goes into an electronic database and is accessible for the healthcare provider. We are committed to fight neglected tropical diseases, and there are 2 more drugs that I would like to talk about a little bit more, and please give me a sign when I'm running over time. We have reformulated flubendazole. This is a drug developed, as you know, in the 60s and was available on the market, treats intestinal helminths at the time, and the same goes for mebendazole, Vermox, which is actually on the essential drug list of the WHO, but is also a drug aimed at intestinal helminths. At the time, in the 60s, the formulation technology had not advanced to the degree that we see today, and therefore there was no bioavailability of the drug, and the only worms that could be targeted were intestinal worms. Now, it also resulted in a perfect risk-benefit ratio, because there was no systemic exposure, and therefore side effects were avoided, while the full efficacy potential of the drugs are exploited in intestinal worms. We are reformulating flubendazole because it is a macrophilaricide, and there aren't that many known. And through that reformulation, we have increased bioavailability and are preparing for phase 1 studies, optimizing still the formulation, and we will have to put a stick in the ground and say this is good enough. But that is very often a very difficult decision to make, because if the technology is available to improve, and it's a difficult balance to strike. When is it good enough? Okay, I would I'm going to leave it with that. Mebendazole we are developing a chewable tablet so that it can be given to children younger than 6. It doesn't need clean water to administer, and it reduces, of course, the risk of choking in those young children. So it can increase the mass drug administration. I would like to end the presentation highlighting a couple of the challenges. You know, and I alluded to it, R&D comes with a high risk and high cost. And that, I think, is in the absence of a profitable market. I mean, you don't need to be genius to understand that the willingness of for-profit industry to invest is minimal. So why do we and others do it? I think it's, first of all, if the innovation is there, and I just would like you to imagine if the researchers find a new drug, as I referred to it, bedaquiline, the first in 40 years with a novel mechanism of action in an extremely high medical need, it is virtually impossible to say, no, we're not going to look at that further. I mean, there is that drive. If you put patients first and you're about innovation and high medical need, then I think there is only one way, is to find a way to get it developed, and that's what we have done. But I must say it was only possible because we could work in partnerships, and there was, to some extent, external funding available, albeit said that most of the burden was carried by us. But to make it sustainable and to increase our shots on goal and to increase the pipeline, I think we need to look how can we make it more attractive for the industry. So there are a couple of things, and we can discuss them perhaps a little bit in more detail. But I think incentives are needed, and you might be aware of the review voucher, the priority review voucher, and I picked that out as one example of an incentive that already exists. But it has been, it hasn't been led to a lot of or an increase in pharmaceutical industry stepping into developing these drugs. There's only 2 vouchers given, to the best of my knowledge, one of which actually was to us for bedaquiline. But it is a pull mechanism, I would say. You only get a prize at the end when all the risk and investment has happened. And if it is not that effective to make a decision early on to start development or even research, because it's far away and it gets in the books. When we look at the potential value, first of all, it's very uncertain what the value might be of a voucher. It gives you the potential to get accelerated review and save 6 months review timeline, so you can get 6 months faster to the market with any drug if you have that voucher. But a voucher has been used and didn't result actually in acceleration if the drug that is under review doesn't pass the test. So it is very, very late in the game that it is completely de-risked. So if you carry forward that risk when you start an early program, the true value of the voucher is very, very limited. I want to go back to other potential incentives that could de-risk drug development, advanced market commitments, and I think we've seen that in the vaccine business, where you have a commitment to a certain volume at a certain price, even once it gets to the market. So social impact bond financing and price models, this basically are along certain steps in development. When certain milestones are achieved, money can be made available to honor that commitment until that milestone. And then I think the one that probably carries most weight is the transferable market exclusivity period. And what that means is that when you do something in a neglected tropical disease or in an area where there is not, where there is a high medical need and not much activity in research and development, that any drug that gets approved there allows you to extend the exclusivity period of a drug that you already have on the market, any you can choose. And that can be short, medium, or long-term extension, but that, I think, would carry a lot of weight to actually bring forward the R&D in. I talked about that. A last word about innovative partnerships. I think we can bring certain skill sets to the table, but we cannot solve it alone, and we have to be humble in the industry as well. And therefore, partnerships is the way forward, and I think that will also be a theme that will be further discussed today. We have quite some experience and history in that. These are only a number of the partners that we have been working for, and one of the reasons that we have brought everything together in a global public health group is especially the model that is different, as I mentioned in the beginning. The model to develop drugs, to do research and development, is different compared to the for-profit R&D. Here, the expertise, the networking, the models in partnerships are a lot more important, but require also in our industry a different expertise and mindset. This is my last slide. Moving forward, I think we need to create and maximize synergies among all stakeholders, again, pointing out to partnerships. I think we need to look at incentives to bring more of the pharmaceutical companies into the research and development for these diseases, and to expand even the activities of those who are already active. We all want to take the opportunity to contribute to global public health. I think I would like to stop there, and thank you for your attention.